from the Fed governors that maybe a couple of 25 basis point drops from here to the end of the year.
And I don't even know, I assume a mortgage broker, but was talking about the virtue of broker price opinions over an appraisal.
It can write him 1,000 lines of code in a 30 seconds, but he is the bottleneck because he has to go through that code line by line looking for bugs. Episode 46 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, we are back again talking about the awful real estate market and economic news. Welcome back. Here we go.
Two uninteresting guys talking about interesting topics that are depressing. We could maybe add a third topic to that, Mark. I've mentioned before, my wife's actually, I think, a fan of the podcast, but she's like, where did you guys come up with that? Or like, when did Mark come up with that? And I was like, well, I'm afraid it was just an obvious reality looking in the mirror that we're not all that interesting, even though we find the topics we talk about pretty interesting. So take that for what it's worth. She wasn't disputing our kind of self-labeling here.
You've got to have taglines. They've got to be authentic. That felt pretty authentic and nice to know that it connected with at least one listener. And a few others have mentioned it too. Of course, you and I's humor is a little kind of tongue in cheek and self-deprecating. So it just fits it checks all the boxes for us, I think. So yeah, Jeff, we were talking offline. I think we've mentioned this on a podcast or two. One thing on a personal note that you and I share is an appreciation for fasting occasionally. And we had talked about this a little bit ago. And one thing I don't think we've ever done kind of together is that we've talked about the benefits and that we do it, but we kind of do it quietly, maybe me a little less quietly than you. But we thought about maybe kind of doing that together. And I wonder if the start of the next month might be the time to do that.
That actually aligns with I don't even know where I came up with this, to be honest with you, Mark, other than, having seen you do it and just talk about some of the benefits. I'm like, oh, it sounds interesting. I'll give it a try. It hasn't been uncommon for me to do something. And this is the first Sunday of every month in our church, they'll have like a fast Sunday, which is kind of a misnomer. I remember growing up or saying, this is not fast. This is taking forever. If I'm like missing a meal or two, it didn't feel like going by quickly, but nothing ever beyond like a 24-hour kind of a thing. And so it's been interesting. So I've just kind of settled into, I'll try quarterly, doing an extended, like a 3-day fast, drinking stuff, obviously, especially it's 110 degrees outside. I don't think I would survive, without some hydration, but it lines up, right with when I'd be trying to do something. So I even thought it might be kind of funny if we got on and started, broke the fast, while we're on here and see, talk about some of the sensations of returning to food again. I'll give my wife, I don't talk to her much about it. Sometimes I'll give her a hard time, or one of my brothers when they pop in. I'm like, that feeling when you haven't eaten since Sunday and you're talking to them on Wednesday or something. And they're like, no, I have never done that. I don't know what you're talking about. That sounds miserable. It's not, but it sounds like it if you haven't done it.
Yeah, it's not necessarily easy. It's certainly hard to get over the mental gap of it being possible. This is a little more true than I think I care to admit, but these are interesting times, and part of the thing we have to do here is monitor a lot of this stuff so that we've got topics to talk about. But also, because so much change directly impacts business, you've got to stay on top of a lot of this stuff, or you feel like you need to. And so you watch all this stuff that gets you down. And, I think subconsciously, food sometimes is a comfort there. And these fasts break that up for me. It's like a reminder, hey, this habit you built is not good. The fast sort of breaks that and sort of shakes me back into reality. I've also thought, what do they say? If how do you know that a pilot is a pilot? Just wait 3 minutes, he'll tell you, or she'll tell you. I think the same thing is true about someone on a carnivore diet. I had done this for 18 months and found enormous benefit from it. And I've thought about renewing that too. And that is really eating nothing but meat only, really, and really not moving from that at all, and seeing a ton of benefit. And there's some habits I need to break one way or another. So maybe I'll talk about that journey if I end up committing in that direction.
If you resume it, we'll have Mark the carnivore, and I don't know what I'll have to take on at that point. Maybe I'll have to be an herbivore to offset you or something, and settle for stupid salads or something. It was interesting to hear some of those benefits that you've had, though, because I'd always assumed that only like a meat diet would have certain negative benefits as well that just didn't actually manifest themselves when you did it over a longer period of time. So that was a little bit surprising to me.
You bet. Yeah, I think I naturally enjoy, and even the business that we're in, Jeff, I think is a little bit of who says it can't be this way. And I look at kind of the traditional view of like nutrition in that way too. My wife's a dietitian, hates that I did the carnivore thing. So there's some added benefit for me too, to rib her a little bit or whatever. But anyway, well, enough about that, Jeff. But I do think we can add a little bit of that from our personal lives in the show. I'd look forward to doing that, enjoying it. As we are comforting ourselves from news that does not directly help us, I think that could take us well into interest rates. Our beloved Chairman Jerome Powell spoke, I think it was yesterday, as we're recording this now, and decided that that raising rates was not a good idea. Now, I think I saw that there is a roughly 89% chance that there will not be a reduction in July either. It looks like, according to the dot plots from the Fed governors, that maybe a couple of 25 basis point drops from here to the end of the year. That is less than the 3 that people were talking about in May. So not a great report, and they're citing a strong economy. They are pointing back to, hey, we said that we want inflation to get to 2% or below. It's at 2.4. I think a lot of people are saying, well, isn't 2.4 good enough? Didn't you about mean that? They're saying no. No, we meant what we said. We have unemployment at 4.2% with non-farm payrolls going really strong. And GDP, I think, has been projected to be growing at about a 2.5% clip in 2025. I think estimates are lowering maybe a little bit, but the economy's kind of been booming, and the metrics we've gotten over the last 30 days are suggesting the same sort of thing. Not great for the real estate. I think a lot of this news is generally good, especially in the face of the unknowns with this tariff discussion. But I don't know where that leaves us, and it. Maybe I'll tee this up to you, Jeff, that FHFA director Bill Pulte has gotten very vocal, as has President Trump, about Powell raising rates or resigning now because he isn't. And, at least Bill, I'm sure, sees some of the pain in the real estate market and is won that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, you said Powell raising rates. You mean him reducing rates, for sure, to clarify. But, it's interesting because people have their incentives, right? And I think Trump and his policy and his team are benefited from lower interest rates to offset the potential impact of tariffs and some of the policies that they have in place. Like them, hate them, think they're going to work or not. I still don't know how they will play out. But for him, lower rates help the economic policy that he has. Bill Pulte on the FHFA and in the residential real estate space, would receive a bit of a boon if rates were lowered materially. Now, the Fed interest rate is not the 30-year mortgage lending rate, of course, but they're kind of related. At some level, there may be, I don't know if you'd call them distant cousins or exactly what kind of an analogous relationship you would call for them, but a trend that way does impact the 10-year Treasury, which is much more tied to the mortgage interest rate. But as I read it, Mark, I think there's some concerns on the horizon that the Fed has, and all along the Fed is intended to be non-political and not influenced by whatever the president of the day happens to want for their policies. And I think, understand where, the Fed, and it's not just Jerome Powell. I mean, he's the chairman, right? But, you've got governors there that ultimately vote to make this happen. And I think you had even mentioned on a previous podcast, it's like he doesn't just wield the rate wand. He obviously is more influential than anyone else in directing them, but it's a board. It's not an individual that just decides arbitrarily what the Fed fund rate is going to be. But that said, or that aside, I think they're still worried about their dual mandate of keeping pricing stable on the inflation side and keeping employment full on the economic or the employment side. And employment is very strong right now, and inflation is going the right direction, but I think they're worried about a higher likelihood of inflation turning course than continuing its course. If it continues its course to 2%, if it drops below that, I think it would be kind of a no-brainer that they would start cutting. If employment started to spike, unemployment started to spike, or we had a real change there, I think that they would look at it differently. But I think they're saying, we're worried that things may go the wrong direction and would rather sit at the current rate than drop them, have things change, then have to start increasing rates and constantly be chasing, whatever the economic data is. In retrospect, they may look back and say, you should have done something different. I mean, it's always easy to Monday morning quarterback these decisions, down the road. But my read from what I'm seeing is that they're saying, hey, we don't have data that supports it yet. And if anything, we're worried about where things might be going that could lead to inflation going the wrong direction, not continuing its current course.
Well, Jeff, in the impact on the real estate market, I think what is interesting here. So we don't have the graph necessarily prepared to share here, but suffice to say that a Zillow graph showing 35 of the 50 states or something along those lines are showing a month-over-month decline in real estate prices. And yeah, I see you working, Jeff. If you want to share it while I'm talking, great. I'm sure I can bloviate for long enough. But I think a lot in the housing market that are frustrated with the lack of movement of interest rates is, darn, man, you are really pulling into a deeper problem in real estate. And what happens if the broader real estate market, housing market, really starts to see price depreciation, and there is no relief from this stuff. And I think a lot of people need help because they need to move and have been holding on, or have student loans kind of coming back on, or whatever, and just aren't in a position to do much of anything about it. And I saw in one of the quotes from Bill Pulte in the X post that he had is that, it's like, look, we can help a lot of people if we get a little bit of help on the rates. And so I'm sure that we see it, you see folks that need quite a bit of help. And so we've got this graph here, and you see, pretty meaningful these are month over month. So, you could multiply this times 12 to get a yearly, if the trend held, depreciation in a lot of these blue and purple states. So, it's tough out there, I think, and it has been for quite some time. And the Fed has been doing a lot of these things really absent the consideration of the housing market to some degree. Like, look, we got bigger fish to fry. Yes, this is going to hurt housing, but I really can't worry about that right now. We've got bigger fish to fry. And I think that mentality is continuing to go along. And I don't know if it's proper or not to weigh housing heavier and all the other things that are impacted by interest rates being at lower rates. I don't know. It is part of the decisions that they've got to go through for sure.
Yeah, well, and we talked last week about the housing or the shelter cost as a component in inflation rates, and that one of the things that was holding it up. And I think, we were kind of landing on the reality that if interest rates give, that helps impact the shelter cost and the inflation rate. So, a reduction in interest rate could actually lead to a reduction in overall inflation data numbers. But absent a change in the interest rates, we're seeing the charts here saying, well, the market's going to correct at some point if the underlying shelter and housing costs, just aren't sustainable. So, interesting. It's fascinating to me to see the kind of a number of different ways to parse the same story that we've been observing for quite a while. And this graph just paints the picture of, 32 of the 50 states reducing from April to May, a reduction in home values. Most of these are less than 1%, which it would annualize to less than a 12% decrease. And in the Northeast, you're seeing some price gains still, because of, I think, a migration back to some of the areas that had an exodus during the pandemic. Yeah, but interesting to see how the market or the values are changing. Now, these aren't like catastrophic fall off a cliff reductions. Something less than 10% annualized is usually absorbable by the market. But the question is always, is the Titanic moving in a direction that is going to stay the course of for a while or not? And I think part of the answer to that question is, what do rates do? If they change, then I don't think you'll need to see as much price correction. But if they stay high, if heaven forbid they go any higher, I think it could exacerbate the trend that we're seeing on more states seeing a decrease in values than not.
Jeff, 10 or 12% is something that can be absorbed from the market. I think it's a great point. I do think that maybe a message to appraisers who are obviously already looking at this, and a message to loan officers and realtors and lenders who are receiving appraisals back, that this an alert, like we should be expecting to see on some percentage of appraisals some declining values, because 10 or 12% is certainly something that should be recognized in an appraisal. When we're going through an analysis. Obviously, one neighborhood in is different from the neighboring neighborhood, depending on price range and all those sorts of things. So there's huge caveats there, but we should be paying attention to that, I think.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Mark. In fact, I didn't prepare this, and I probably won't be able to in time, but you had shared a next post from, and I don't even know, I assume a mortgage broker, but was talking about the virtue of broker price opinions over an appraisal, because he's saying the broker opinion of value doesn't cost anything and maybe tells us what we want to hear, whereas the appraisal is a pencil pusher who just calls the brokers for their data anyway. And it as an appraiser, it kind of rubs me the wrong way, even though it's a little bit humorous, at some level. But as you're talking, the point is, like, the appraiser is tasked with, and in fact, the users of appraisals are demanding that appraisers look at and say, what is the market actually doing? And if it's going down, you better be telling us that it's going down and adjusting comparable sales for the fact that it's going down. Whereas, brokers, when they're coming up with an opinion of value, they just have fewer standards. They don't have the scrutiny of a secondary mortgage market threatening to turn them into the state if they aren't supporting very well what they're doing. And so I can understand why somebody might be happy to get an answer that more of what they like and cost less money, but I would certainly argue that it's more reliable than what the appraisal is or should be.
Jeff, if we don't create emotion in this podcast, and I'm not sure we're doing our job, so let me read verbatim to get the appraisers riled up. And this statement, there are kernels of truth to it on some level, and a lot of appraisers may not be helpful in assessing market value for certain intended uses, right? Maybe not having a lot of experience in those valuations for an intended use beyond the mortgage decision. But to read verbatim, it was broker opinion of value is greater than appraisal. A great BPO is an actual roadmap to attaining market value by an experienced broker. An appraisal is just an expensive book report by a pencil pusher who call brokers for their data. One is infinitely more valuable. There it is. Well, Jason, thank you. And we read that. We'd love to talk about it, frankly. There's pieces of this that certainly hit home for me, and I always try and take any critique, internally and weigh whatever usefulness I can to it. But I think a lot of the market feels that way in certain areas. But I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's with no boundaries and no rules to follow, no burden of proof. It's much easier to say what someone wants to hear. That often is the most difficult job of an appraiser, is to communicate things that are not wanted to hear because we have the burden of proof. And it is tough there, but I think these things can be a call to action to appraisers to do a little better job marketing their services, communicating their processes, and even listening to the users' concerns and trying to address them within USPAT.
Yeah, really good point, Mark. And I think that's one of the areas that Yeah, in almost anything that we do, but especially in appraisal and when you're communicating, an answer or results that people don't want to hear, usually the appraiser has good judgment and reasoning for being where they are and why they're doing what they're doing. I for years have sat as a hearing officer for at tax appeal time, where the homeowners will, or the property owners will come in with something to try to contest their taxes, saying, hey, you've said my property's worth too much, I'm paying too much taxes on it. The county comes in and says, well, here's the data we have and why we think the the taxable value is reasonable. And what I find is a lot of times the property owners will come in with, a CMA or a list of sales that an agent pulled for them or something that are clearly cherry picked to give a predetermined answer. But there really isn't any accountability on the part of the agent or the broker who's trying to tell somebody what they want to hear. Whereas, that's a direct violation of an appraiser's professional standards to say, oh, you want a certain number? Here we go. I get a little jaded sometimes seeing like how this plays out on the legal side, where you get sometimes appraisers that seem to be defending positions that I wouldn't feel comfortable defending. But there is the standard, but it all comes back exactly like you said, Mark, to the being able to communicate well. Here's what I did and why I did it and why I think the market is telling me, whatever the answer is. And on the other side, it's easier for the broker to just say, you want comps that tell you this, okay, here they are, even if they're, mobile homes down the street, compared to your super nice house. In fact, you may not want to hear this story, but I one time years and years ago had a guy who had a beautiful cabin up in the mountains trying to appeal his taxes specifically, and was, coming in and saying, I only want you to compare my 5,000 square foot, like 20, 24, 36 inch, like in diameter logs imported out of Canada to these these little 1,000 square foot crappy A-frame homes that were, a couple miles down the road, and don't use anything different because I want to tell the county that my property's not worth what it is. And that just wasn't able to do it. Like that didn't work out. But you get people who have motivations, but the appraiser can't take that assignment where the agent, might say, okay, like you hear those comps, go take them to the county and see what happens. But it's just a different standard of proof, like you said. And it's, the onus is on the appraiser to be able to communicate why the answer is what it is.
You bet. There are a lot of good mastermind groups out there. And I know a lot of folks that are really trying to serve this kind of, direct to consumer, to realtor market, pre-listing, or whatever sorts of uses are out there. And I see some people do it really well. And it's not for those that aren't willing to think creatively about their messaging and about how their practice can be applied to those uses. I think that's I think we fall short often as appraisers because we're applying the mortgage standard and not thinking much more about it than that. And there is a very different way to pitch the services, to market the service, to communicate the values, all these sorts of things, I think. So, Jeff, on the topic of appraisal, and, whenever I hear, and we venture into like BPO and serving, whether it's tax appeal or whether it's direct to consumer and all those things, my mind, this is not where the normal mind goes, but my mind immediately goes to, folks that are saying, man, who wants to keep doing mortgage work? It's not going to be around very long. So you got to get into stuff like this. I hear it every week. I know you do too. And a lot of people have successfully done that well. I think it's difficult to do at scale, but I think somebody will. I hope somebody will, for the sake of the appraisal profession. But I've had two kind of in-depth conversations with two different people. One kind of a large player in the space. One, I'd say, a small to medium player, but being aggressive out there and in the mortgage appraisal space, in mortgage lending space. And the one that's a little bit larger of a player, just really total confidence in the role of the appraiser over the next decade plus, and really not sharing a lot of doubt or fear with what we hear every day about artificial intelligence or the residential appraiser going away, and then the other, really a total opposite opinion, which is, what we're faced with right now. And I think it deals with the uncertainty we've talked a lot about on this podcast. The other is, man, I think you got to get out right now. I don't even know what this looks like in the next 2 or 3 years, and I think I think because I'm constantly assessing, but I fall in the camp of the first, which is that, it's a decade plus or more before we really have that. And we've talked about some of those reasons, Jeff, where the users of our services are uniquely risk intolerant. It's that highly regulated mortgage finance space, the who to blame when things go wrong, and when real estate cycles like it always does, and so there's just a lot of risk to big change. We have change coming, but I don't know, all of this, it just highlights to me, and I thought I'd mention on the episode and maybe tee you up a little bit to talk, but I'm thinking constantly about what all of these changes mean, the new forms, artificial intelligence, and on, and what that means for the residential appraiser.
I don't think I can even hear the reference to regulation anymore, and not think of Jamie Dimon's glowing response to what it is to try to operate in the mortgage, like the residential mortgage space, with the regulations and the rules and the regulators, as he's railing about what a terrible business it is. It definitely resonates, though. I don't think there is a very high tolerance for an alternative, a complete alternative to the appraisal. And you struggle to get even appraisers to agree on the same thing, but it feels to me like we're still quite a ways away. Maybe that day will never come, I don't know, but we're quite a ways away from really pulling out of the process the appraisal in the way that current mortgages are constructed, that they're backstopped. If the mortgage space was different, if it was just private banks that were holding these mortgages and they could set their own dials on risk, and there is that contingent in the mortgage space, but so much of what's done is sold on the secondary market, and that secondary market has requirements and demands that says, look, we'll buy these mortgages, but only as you go through a certain level of due diligence, and then part of that is a credible valuation of the asset that backstops or underscores the mortgage that's being made. And so, I mean, it's very possible. And like you, Mark, I'm constantly assessing what is the state of the technology and of the industry and the profession, and where is it headed. It's always hard to predict the future, and it's always pretty easy to tell what happened in the past. And so as we're sitting here today, I'm subject to changing my mind as well as to where it's going. But I really think that for those appraisers, but also others in the real estate space that embrace the technology, that learn how to operate within it, that don't necessarily view it as the end all be all, but as a tool of productivity, as a tool of insight, I think the future's bright, for us and for others in that space. I don't think it's going to be bright. And those that have the mentality of, I'm not going to learn something different or change what I do today, yeah, they may as well get out today, because they will be left behind in pretty short order. But I don't think that the future is necessarily dim for those in this space that are willing to embrace the available tools and learn and evolve with them as they evolve, because what AI looks like today is going to be different from tomorrow, and certainly from 2 years ago when they rolled out Chat GPT.
You bet. Yeah. I appreciate those comments and perspective. And it's just the easiest thing to do is to be doom and gloom. I think that is the natural human disposition when littered with all this negative headline and uncertainty about the future. So I think it's worth talking or continuing to talk about it and evolve, and hopefully it's helpful to some that are listening to this, who are questioning things and concerned. I was listening to Andrei Karpathy, and he was a guy that ran Tesla's like autopilot and autonomy, like self-driving system, neural net. So he's like an AI expert, and he's since retired, and I think he's interested in education and kind of being a thought leader around artificial intelligence at this point. So he's just kind of on his own doing these things. But he delivered a keynote speech to a group of kind of incoming students learning to be software engineers, and was kind of giving a state of what he sees and what it is. So it was really prime for me, who's really most interested right now in understanding what it is, not how to use it, maybe on some level. But so there were a couple of points that, it's really still very much in its infancy, and a lot of it makes it sort of unusable to him as a coder, not unusable, but slows him down. And there's some real pivot points that are necessary for it to really use him. So it can write him 1,000 lines of code in a 30 seconds, but he is the bottleneck because he has to go through that code line by line, looking for bugs and security issues and all sorts of things that exist there. And so he is the real bug there, and the hallucinations create problems, of people relying, certainly a problem in our industry, trying to do that. But there are just some macro things that I thought were interesting. The first is that he was describing what's happening with these language models is sort of unique in human history, in that maybe the internet or computers generally, just as a couple of examples, but you could the manufacturing of steel or whatever was really useful to people. How these technologies were first made available to those that could have access to them, or leaders of a government or a special organization. Certainly the case in the internet. I think the military, rumor at least, I'm not sure I confirmed this, but the military maybe kind of put the first internet together. US had it for a really long time before it was released to the public at large. And that language models are really unique in that kind of the second they were created, they were ported through the internet to everyone that had a computer and connected to the internet. And so from the very creation of these large language models and the amazing development that they are, the whole world at one time is trying to figure out what these things are and working to build what it's going to be. And it's a really unique thing. And we see that. And so because of that, he's saying that we just have this almost sort of archaic, he was likening it to the operating system in the 1960s that we're sort of writing in directly to that. And we've got to allot a little bit of that computing power to whoever is pinging in and using it. And if you give that person a little bit of compute, you got to pause somebody else from getting that compute right now. And so it's not dispersed very well. And we're just missing the what he called GUI. I wish I knew the exact, it's user interface utility build-ons on top of this text directly into the mainframe that we're using. And those are where the real impacts are going to be. And instead of that being developed for us by a government or special org, it's people just kind of trying to figure it out on the fly together. I thought that was an interesting description of what we're living through, and maybe describe some of the inefficiencies in trying to implement for the little guy like you and me, and all the way up to the big guys that build something and then it's immediately replaced by the language model themselves or whatever.
Well, the pace of change of the language models, they get so much better so quickly. I mean, that's challenging to keep up with. But yeah, that's a really interesting framing of the way that it's evolving, because, when you think back to the internet rolling out, it had rapid adoption, but it wasn't readily available to everybody at once. It didn't feel like, it took time to ramp up. Whereas, the language model that all of a sudden is available, anybody can get onto Chat GPT or any other model that, that you want. And then it's trying to understand, okay, so what is this thing? What's it good at? What is it not good at? Oh, they just released a new model, 6 months down the road. Now it operates differently and has different strengths and all of that. So it really is, kind of learning how to use this thing mid-flight, in a lot of ways. And, as you kind of talk through that, Mark, it gives, added clarity as to what it is and how it's evolving and rolling out. And like you, understanding how this thing works and what can and should you rely on it for and not. It's interesting, but it's also critical, I think, information in the moment. And I think everybody expects that it will refine over time, and what it looks like, in 1 and 2 and 3 years from now will be more reliable, less hallucinations, probably more utility built in, more readily available on devices and all of those sorts of things. But until that's the reality now, it's we're kind of evolving and learning with it. So it was a fascinating perspective. I look forward to watching his discussion on that, because I think there's more nuggets to gain than I have at the moment even.
You bet. Yeah, I don't have it fully prepared here in the moment. His description of kind of software 3.0 that we're entering in right now. And I think one was somewhere along the lines of us writing code that then is being used. The next was kind of writing neural nets that kind of are building weights to kind of read what everybody has put together on the internet and then using that to inform code. and where we are entering now is kind of facilitating the language models to write the weights for the neural nets to read, and so it's like the computer is just going higher and higher up the tree. It's really interesting, but on the lines of the weaknesses of where we are, the lack of memory I think this is going to be a really big change when we get solid memory in place in these language models. And as it relates to these weights, he was describing the two movies, Memento and 50 First Dates. Jeff, I was telling you about this. He was describing, each of these are the main character has short-term memory loss. For those not familiar, every day I think they go to sleep and they wake up not remembering anything. That the main characters, like language models, suffer from fixed weights and erasing of context windows daily. I thought that was kind of an interesting way to think about these main characters and sort of losing it and the limitations that exist in both of those cases. People go way out of their way to have to deal with those limitations that exist in the movies. So, and I think we're dealing with that a little bit on our own.
Well, yeah, that's such, I think, an insightful perspective as to what it's doing in the moment. I haven't seen Memento, but my wife and I had seen in the past and enjoyed the 50 First Dates. Kind of funny with Adam Sandler and stuff. You wake up and forget, the everything from the first, from what you did yesterday, and it's interesting to think about, this Chat GPT or any other AI, window that you're using, not having that historical context. There is some level of training, I think, that happens, through experience or use over time. But this lack of the memory specifically, I've heard others talk about as being a real limiting factor as well. And as described, even though I don't understand it, intimately, a very difficult challenge to overcome. It's not just throw some hard coded storage at it and it solves the problem. So it'll be kind of fun to watch it evolve, but I think something that isn't an easy problem to resolve in the usage of the AI and the LLMs the way that they're constructed currently. And maybe it's a complete revamp. Maybe there's some other clever way that they come up with to solve the problem, but it seems like it's not something that's an easy fix in the moment.
You bet. Well, Jeff, I maybe should mention this at the beginning of the episode here to make sure that folks hear the shout out. But we mention this kind of generically often. But man, the kind of stuff that keeps us going here. First, we can't be doing the show without Maggie from our office that is kind of running this along with Dinesh. Just all the production and thumbnail creations and creative that revolves around this. Really appreciative of that. And there's so many comments that we get, and it's surprising to me the percentage of comments that we get as a percentage of listenership, which is light, and you and I are fine certainly with that. But I think such deep and profound commentary and analysis of what we're trying to do in the show, Jeff, and really not outrightly stated at all. But I think people are listening intently, and I'm really encouraged by that. We had a commenter on our last episode. I think Vince was the first name and the screen name, who remembered the appraisal blog and my father and Brian Davis and Patrick Haggard. So it's just a lot of folks kind of blast from the past, but it is allowing us to connect to different folks in and around real estate and on a deeper level, which I'm really appreciating.
Boy, amen to that, Mark. I regularly will get some feedback or messages from Tim, Anderson specifically, and your response, even to his message he sent us last week was, man, he really understands at a deep level something, just like you said, like that we haven't stated but are trying to accomplish in terms of diving a little deeper on these topics and understanding them at the core level and just getting the wheels turning for other people as well. And so not having stated specifically some of our goals, he's very naturally picking up on, what that is and calling it out in a positive way. And so, Tim, we love you. Thank you for the positive feedback that you continue to give. And he's not the only one. I'm surprised sometimes by people that, oh yeah, I know the podcast. In fact, you and I were on a call with Sean Telford, who was on an early episode that we did with on the Perea series, And, he'd made a comment about hearing a lot from you and I, catching up on podcast episodes and stuff. But again, another wealth of knowledge. I mean, people that I look up to in the profession out there that have done and seen more than I have, and just appreciate the positive feedback that they and so many others are giving. So keep it coming, and we're not throwing in the towel on this little labor of love in the moment. We enjoy doing it, which is what keeps it going, but also really do appreciate the feedback that people have on it.
You bet. Yeah. Yeah. It's it really is encouraging and great. So you and I think none of the guests know yet, but we've got over a dozen guests. I think that we are teeing up in our own minds. Some maybe a little ambitious, so we might need the listenership to help us pull some folks in, but we've certainly punched above our weight class before, so we'll give it a shot and be a little less you and I and a little more guest intensive for a run here starting soon. I don't know exactly when, but starting soon. In the meantime, Jeff, I will be in DC at the Industry Advisory Council through the Appraisal Foundation next week. You got any plans anytime soon to be around?
I'm doing my best to not go anywhere for just a minute. May was incredibly busy as far as travel and that sort of thing, but we will be coming into a season where we've got some events in Las Vegas with the Valuation Expo, the Appraisal Summit that'll be coming up. Looking forward to those. We've already teed up some connections there, and maybe doing something with some other podcasters in the space. There's been an idea floated, and we'll see if that gets legs and runs or not. But for the month of June, what's left of it, I'm happy to stay put, I think, at the moment, Mark. But travel opportunities, I think, are around the corner.
Well, Jeff, maybe if I put it out there, it will actually do it. But I do think it would be a lot of fun to do a little bit of a traveling podcast, fireside chat or night with, talking real estate and having a little bit of fun. So maybe we do that. We'll see in and around a conference or otherwise. So we maybe need to be doing this a little bit longer, but it would be fun to do.
Well, you did float the idea of a chocolate milk bar that we could do in addition to a drink bar. So you've already got my interest peaked, and I'm ready to do something. So that will be in our future. I'm pretty sure. I'm looking forward to it.
Very good. Well, Jeff, another episode down. Look forward to the next one.
As always. Thanks, Mark.
All right.